for Australia by 9 wickets. Oldham, what a man for any situation.
He's done it.
Brendon returns to Australia.
Hello everybody, and thanks for watching and thanks for listening. And it is our podcast episode 3 called Road to the Ashes. And it's great to have my co-commentator Mark Waugh alongside me, Junior. Great to have you along for this one.
Good to be here, mate.
And it is also great to have former England captain for the first time on our podcast, David Gower, all the way from the UK, 6:30 in the morning. David, thank you for getting up so early. We really appreciate it. First time on the podcast.
Can I say, for once, it's a pleasure. We actually have, just to conform to the stereotype of the English summer, if I could show you outside, it is gloriously sunny, but it's not sort of Brisbane heat or Sydney heat. It's just gentle end of May. It's probably about 10 degrees out there, but it's glorious. It's lovely. So here I am.
Well, I'm very happy that you're with us and also you're out of lockdown. There's been plenty happening in the world of cricket, Junior, and we'll climb straight into it. But first up, it's Cameron Bancroft. It's Sandpaper Gate once again. When we thought this segment or this story was done and dusted, he's brought that up. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I thought we'd moved on, but look, it's unfortunate. I think his comments have opened up old scars. They were sort of half-baked suggestions as well, which sort of implicates players without naming them. So I think it was a bit unfair with what he said. I think he'd love to take back what he said, but look, there's no doubt about it. Ball tampering or ball management was going on in that series in South Africa, but the fast bowlers have come out and made their statement, haven't they, following on from what Cameron said. They've said that they were not aware about any foreign substance that was taken onto the field. So they're saying they did not know about the sandpaper, whereas Cameron Bancroft is implicating the bowlers with what he said.
David, it's been a big issue over here in Australia, and yes, it's a big issue worldwide. We thought it was done and dusted and we were all going to move on from it. Obviously, that hasn't happened. What's your take on it from way over there, you reckon?
Yeah, I have a feeling that actually somewhere in this murky past lies sort of a half-truth. In other words, yes, of course, the bowler's going to say at this stage, oh, we knew nothing about it. I'm going to ask a couple of pertinent questions, which would have been asked at the time, and they've been had to resurface now. If no one could tell what was going on with the ball, what was the point of doing it in the first place? If there's if you've got a piece of sandpaper in your hand, surely it's got to make, even if the umpire, they say the umpires didn't see or couldn't tell the difference. Well, if they can't tell the difference and the bowlers can't tell the difference, what's the point of doing it?
He's obviously got something in a bee in his bonnet to say that, look, there are other people that knew that. And I'm very, very sure that the bowlers did not know that he was using sandpaper or that was being taken out to the ground at that particular
Look, at the
stage.
moment, we're all guessing because no one's saying either way. But my gut feeling is that very few people knew about the actual sandpaper. I'm pretty sure that there was not many people who knew about it. Yes, there was a lot of ball management going on in that series and they were pushing the line, no doubt about that.
The other thing about this, classically, is that people love rehashing an old scandal. I think, personally, it's absolutely pointless. There was rightfully a sort of a lot of righteous indignation at the time. There was a severe punishment meted out to those who were deemed to be guilty. So those year-long bans, that's a long ban. Considering ICC have said, well, give it a few weeks, that'll be fine. And then Cricket Australia says, actually, no. We're going to make an issue out of this and make it a good year and strip a man of the captaincy and ban everyone else for almost a lifetime. Not quite. So I think it's been done. I think it has been done. It's been resurrected. Yes, we love to talk about these things, but actually, I don't think people really mind. I mean, it's been done. People would like to move on. And we will have more time to talk in this podcast about more interesting things. For instance, the future destination of the Ashes as when it comes up again, which is all too soon.
I think it'll be hard to pick him into the side straight over who's playing the first set at the Gabba, but we will move on. You talked about captaincy, David. You think Steve Smith should be back captaining the side?
Well, we know he's not going to do that until Tim Payne, who has done actually from my perspective, Tim's done a remarkably good job dealing with all the things that were, first of all, the fallout from the ball tampering scandal. So he's had to try and do something to restore the reputation of Australian cricket, and yet keep that hard competitive spirit that we all know so well at the forefront as well. And that's quite a tough balancing act. He's had his own performances to worry about, of course, at the same time, but I think he's done a pretty good job. So For Tim, the ultimate sort of finish to a captaincy career would be to win the Ashes come your summer. So that would be a fitting way if he can. And of course, that's something we'd like to try and prevent from this side of the world. And then you've got decisions to make. But I think if Steve is offered the captaincy again, or if they consider that, I mean, there will be problems because people will instantly latch on to what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, look, I think Tim Payne, when he finishes, which will, could be after the Ashes, I think there's only two choices: Pat Cummins and Steve Smith. That's our field of choices. So I don't think the selectors will steer too far clear of that. There's no other candidates from what I can see, unless someone jumps out of the ground. But I'd say Pat Cummins is favourite to be captain, Steve Smith vice captain. And then if Pat Cummins is rested, Steve Smith will take over.
All right, let's get moving on. David, we've just announced a 23-man squad to tour the West Indies, the Australians. They're playing a one-day series and a T20 series. You'd be stiff
to miss out, wouldn't you?
23 players. I agree with you there. I mean, it's basically everyone that's playing first-class cricket. But I suppose what we're talking about here, David, is there room now to be saying, you know what, maybe we need to be resting our players that have been in the IPL, the fast bowlers, Pat Cummins, Stephen Smith, Dave Warner. Do you feel that that's going to be happening over the next 12 months where these tours are going to be less likely of the main players, given the fact that they might have to quarantine 3 or 4 times before the summer?
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, England are doing the same thing. They just announced a squad for the New Zealand Test matches, which has new names, because those involved in the IPL and those who've been in bubbles for most of our winter, most of the winter season, need a break. And I think what's quite hard for, say, my generation to understand, although I've been in the odd minor bubble, is the general mental deterioration of being stuck in a bubble for so long. We've had debates in the UK about, for instance, through our winter, Sri Lanka, India, people coming in and out of. It's been back and forth. And there have been selection issues that come straight out of that.
I suppose what it does, Junior, is it puts it in perspective what type of tour it is. I mean, yes, T20 World Cup, you pick your best team. An Ashes series or an Indian series, you pick your best team. West Indies, one days, T20s, you may not pick your best team.
Well, I mean, I think if there's a tour scheduled by an Australian cricket team, you pick your best team. I don't care what it is. You're representing Australia, so you should pick your best team. But we know now in the bubble, it affects different players in different ways. So you're going to have to be very flexible in resting players, whether they're the best players or not the best players. It's just a different world we live in now. So, it's going to be give and take with the players, and the selectors are going to have to really work closely individually with the players to see how they are mentally and physically, because, it's tough. It's tough work being in a bubble. Not that I've been in one, but I can imagine it's very tough. So we've got to be a bit more flexible, I think.
David, what about you guys over there? As you talked about, Archer's going in for that elbow surgery. He's out for the series against New Zealand. You've got Ben Stokes coming back. Are they starting, do you think, to prepare for the Ashes series coming over here in Australia? You've got a big summer ahead, but are they starting to plan, do you think?
A bit like Jeannie was saying just now, I would prefer to have available the best players, especially for Test cricket, if you possibly can. But England have acknowledged that their IPL players are due a rest. So the New Zealand series will be played with some interesting new faces. And if you look at the benefit of that, well, I mean, there's a guy called James Bracey, for instance, who'll be making a lot of runs for Gloucestershire, who gets a chance to be part of the squad and gets a chance to play a Test match. And for, that sort of top 3 for England, there are still options there. Whatever hundreds have been made and runs have been made by the guys in possession at the moment, they're not necessarily nailed on. So I think it's quite good to have that sort of pressure on people to perform. Quite good to be able to look at new faces, and it is they're genuine Test matches. But yes, the Ashes is always in our minds. Let's face it. The history tells us that it's rather important, to say the least.
Well, I'm looking at your top 3, and you've got Sibley in there, you've got Rory Burns in there as well, and you've got Zach Crawley. I mean, those 3. They need to be strong and they need to have a great summer, I reckon, if they want to come out here and play the first Test at the Gabba.
Yeah, I mean, Burns, for instance, has got runs, and he's a tough competitor and he's a good character. So I think there's a lot of good things about Rory Burns. Sibley, again, after a gentle start, has started to get decent runs, and they've all got good, strong characters. I think the most talented, from my book, is Crawley. That double 100 against Pakistan in our last summer was a very, very mature effort for a young man.
David, you just touched on a few things that you need to do right to tour Australia and be successful. What are the main things, what are the main challenges for an English cricketer when they do come to Australia? Is it the sledging, the weather, the pitches, or a bit of a combination of all those things?
Sometimes, I mean, I remember all those years ago, sadly, but I remember colleagues of mine being sort of feeling the pressure, especially from crowds. I mean, players, yes, you expect pressure on the field. I mean, sledging, I don't know about you, but I mean, I think sledging is overrated.
Yeah, exactly.
And the back in.
I meant sledging from the crowds, not the players.
78. Yeah, well, I mean, the crowds join in.
Australia has a wonderful record at the Gabba. You debuted at the Gabba in an Ashes Test match back in '78. I mean, do you think that first Test match at the Gabba is pivotal in a Ashes series?
I think it is. Yeah, definitely. I mean, in series where Australia traditionally will sort of look at the Gabba as a banker, as a place they're going to win, be 1-0 up. I mean, for instance, as a commentator, I've seen exactly that happen. And even when, as a commentator, I've seen, for instance, England lose badly at the Gabba, look a bit damaged, go to Adelaide, for instance, where they say, oh, that pitch is more like us, and the damage is done. And if you don't win at Adelaide, well, actually, then you're thinking, oh, we're going to Perth now. I know the schedule's different this time. And you're always under pressure. And when Andrew Strauss won in Australia, they almost lost at the Gabba, but they had this magnificent, 5,000-run stand. Alistair Cook started his glorious run of form there on a pitch that actually became a very, very good batting pitch after a bit of early pressure and pace and bounce. So I think if you survive the Gabba or even win at the Gabba, you're off to a great start, and it sort of levels the series up for you. But you're never off the hook. I think when players go to Australia the first time, I was lucky in the sense that I'd had a summer in Perth playing for about 4 months there and enjoyed my grade cricket experience in Perth the winter before, or the summer before I went to Australia for the first time to play test matches. And of course it was Packer at the time. So although we weren't, I mean, I always hide behind the mantra, there is no such thing as a bad Australian side. And talking of which, the sledging starts every tour I've been on as a player and as a commentator. You arrive in wherever it might be, Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane or Adelaide, or whichever newspaper you pick up on day one describes you as the worst England side ever to tour these shores. Yeah. And that's like Glenn McGrath saying, Glenn will on his gravestone will have 5-0 written because you know that so that sort of pressure. It's a bit of fun. I mean, I love the ones. On that tour when Stuart Broad was named as public enemy #1. I mean, I love the fact that the Brisbane Courier refused to even name him at any stage during 4 months of an Ashes tour. He was just public enemy #1, whatever happened. And all those things are part of in a sense, part of the fun, because what you know as an Englishman going down there is that there will be pressure applied by obviously the players who are trying to win. The Australian team is trying to win the Ashes. Crowds back them up. Wherever you go in the street. I mean, there is this great balance between I know full well if you do well down there, people will grant you full respect. At the end of the day, however many beers they've had, they'll say, well played. They might add a few other words in as well. But if you play well, you gain the respect both of your opposition and of the crowds down there. So, I mean, and let's face it, you said, how hard is it to tour Australia? I think it's fantastic touring Australia. Yep. I've had some of the most memorable times down there, made a lot of friends down there, drunk a lot of your wine.
Flown on the old Tiger Moth now and again. You've done that as well. We did that in 1991.
Absolutely. I mean, where else could I do that? And that was laid on a plate for me.
Not at Heathrow Airport. You couldn't do it at Heathrow.
David, was that your attitude? You enjoyed the spoils of being... Test cricket and touring. We know that time we took off when England were playing Queensland in 1991 and you were meant to be watching the other guys batting. You and Johnny Morris took off on the plane. Was that your sort of attitude to get you through that 4-month tour?
I have to say it's a story which I love it. I mean, I am very glad I did that, even though the management at the time took what is known as a very dim view, and they sort of cracked down rather hard.
You only got a small penalty, didn't you?
What was your penalty? The flight cost me $75. My mate Bruce, the pilot, was very good about that. That was very cheap. Half an hour, including aerobatics and a trip around the beaches, as well as the game at Carrara. And can I just point out, we were side on at the pavilion there, so we needed a bit of a different view of the game. That was my professional reason for going above the pitch.
So how many people knew you were doing it? How many of the players knew you were going to do it?
This is during the game, the tour game.
Well, let me see. The bowlers had no idea that No, sorry. The only people really who knew were my great mate, Alan Lamb. I sort of said to Lammy, because these planes have been taking, the story, they've been taking off basically behind the sight screen for 3 days. And we watched them do their half-hour flights and come back, and it was all rather nice. And I just thought, with an afternoon watching Robin Smith and Lammy bat, two of England's finest, born in Durban and Langermanbeth, but just take half an hour off, have a bit of fun, was just too good to miss. Now, Lammy knew, because I said to him, I think I might just pop round the corner and see if we can get a flight. Johnny Morris overheard that, sadly for him, because he just made 100 and was trying to get into the team. So he said, well, can I come too? And I thought, well, I suppose if I'm going, I can't really stop it. So we took the 2 planes, not just the one. And of course, it rather impacted, I think, rather more on his career than mine. But at least a lot of my career had already been.
Oh, lovely stroke. Lent into that again. Stroked it through the offside for 4 more. His accuracy's all awry. And that's 100 for David Gower. Another Test match century for the England captain.
Foot mould. Bennett is out. Gilbert remains unbeaten. And England have won the Test match. They have regained the Ashes, the margin in innings and 94 runs. David Gower must be one of the happiest men in the sporting world at this moment.
Well, one of our great moments in our podcast is we get to reflect on an Ashes series, and we picked out 1985 in England, Australia taking on England. England actually won that and retained the Ashes, Mark Waugh. But I just want to go to 1985 because, to me, it was a tumultuous time in Australian cricket. It was the rebel tour to South Africa. Players were selected to go to South Africa. They changed their mind, went to England. Alan Border wasn't sure who could trust on that tour.
Yep.
Kerry Packer paid out some contracts. It was a tricky time in Australian cricket, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. And I think it reflected on that tour with the Australians not having the spirit that you normally would associate with an Australian touring team. I think Alan Border himself admitted that, he was very distracted, and as you said, he couldn't trust certain players that were going to South Africa. Then they got paid to come on the tour to England. On the other side of the story was England had players coming back from the Rebel Tour. So their team was actually strengthened by players coming back from the Rebel Tour, whereas ours was weakened. We had players over there, guys like Terry Alderman, etc., that were on that tour instead of the Ashes, and then there was players there that Alan just couldn't trust as well, as you said.
David, just the prelude to 1985, you were the captain for England, had a great series. I mean, did you feel that Australia, looking at their touring squad, was right for the picking?
You never make that assumption. For instance, I'm very glad you picked 85 as opposed to 89. Because I looked at, I could just tell the story against myself, as it were. I got the job back in 89, 4 years later, against Alan Border again, AB, who was a very different AB in 89 personally, because he made, as you well know, he made that big effort to be as grumpy as he possibly could to everyone, including his own team. The only words he said to me for about 3 months were heads and we'll bat, or words, the equivalent. And it worked. So, but I thought, for instance, if you looked at the manpower in those 2 teams, 85 and 89 for Australia, they weren't dissimilar. Yes, I can understand there were sort of things simmering under the surface in 85, but as Mark's just said, as Julian's just said, we had players coming back in from a rebel tour. We'd been to India the winter before without Gooch, Embury, Botham, and won in India, which was actually one of my as proud a moment almost as winning the Ashes. Obviously not quite, but that was a notable achievement with a team that came together And if you want, background noise, we had Mrs. Gandhi assassinated the day we arrived. We had our own Deputy High Commissioner assassinated, killed at traffic lights a month later. Right. That was a tour that had interesting things, not the best things going on in the background. So I've also seen many an individual player and many a team perform at their strongest when things are against them. Somehow that adversity brings people together. So, although why would I want to sympathise with AB in '85? I have no intention of sympathising with AB. He got his excuses in early at the start of this story. As I say, we make no assumptions about what's going to happen. And in fact, the way the series went, it was 1-1 after 2. Then we had the 2 draws on good pitches. And then, the pressure was on us at the end, Birmingham and the Oval, Edgbaston and the Oval, because, I needed to win that series to regain the Ashes. Australia held the Ashes, actually, at the start of that series. So if we'd let that slip and either lost or drawn the series, the Ashes would have stayed, obviously, metaphorically, in Australia. So I thought it was a good series, not just because we won it, but, in the end, it took a bit of something at the end in Birmingham and in London to finish it off.
It looked like very much a batsman's summer. The weather looked pretty hot. The pitches were pretty dry. So the batsman dominated. And then Richard Ellison came in the last 2 test matches and he basically changed that series, didn't he?
Correct. And you're right. Richard Ellison was brilliant. There was a ball that he bowled at AB in the second innings at Edgbaston on the 4th evening, which was the classic brisk medium, fast medium paces, swinging slightly in, hitting the seam, nipping away slightly, hitting the top of off stump. And even AB had to say, had to say to himself and to Richard, in fact, well, there's nothing I can do about that. And there was nothing he could have done. It was the perfect delivery. And if ever you're looking for a moment of inspiration as a captain, as a team, that ball was it, because you knew from previous experience that if someone like AB dug in on a final day, well, actually, it could be tricky. And in fact, the following day, although we had, I think, 5 in the bag and an entire day ahead of us, it started with drizzle, very English, persistent, annoying drizzle. And I remember AB in the dressing rooms at Edgbaston that 5th morning, just giggling at me, looking at this drizzle, thinking, no, mate, it's not going to work. You're going to be off the field all day. And we all know AB very well. It's an annoying little giggle, isn't it? And he was looking a bit smug there. And we had to wait until the afternoon to get on the field and finally get the victory. But of course, the other thing you're probably going to mention is the infamous catch off the boot. I wouldn't, if you want to mention it, feel free.
Was there one? Could Wayne Phillips have got them home?
Flipper was going well. He was playing exceptionally well. There were wickets tumbling at the other end, but he kept the strike, and he never seemed to miss. So whatever we tried, Botham, the seamers, Ellison, spinners. There wasn't that many. The pitch was actually still in pretty good nick. For instance, in an era where we used to play 2 spinners. Historians will maybe look back at this fondly. So I had Edmonds bowling over the wickets, slow left arm over the wickets into a bit of rough outside Flipper's off stump. But it didn't seem to make much difference. We had men all around the bats, so there were boundaries available. Runs weren't really the issue. And of course, this is one of the great moments where I will tell you.
Well, you had the best view. You had the best view.
I'm going to say, I'll see if I can find a Bible or something, or some sort of wisdom to swear on. I will tell you, I kept my eye on the ball as Flipper went back on the back foot, tried to sort of cut it away through the offside. Lammy turned his back on it as one of the silly points. And yes, it went bat to boot. Boot was about a foot off the 9 inches to 12 inches off the ground. And it lobbed up one of the simplest, thank you very much, I'll have that. I wonder if we can invent a virtual DRS on this. I wonder if there's technology that someone with a computer brain could sort of add to this. But I'm very happy with the decision for all sorts of reasons and would swear by it. AB, bless him, and Flipper was obviously a bit miffed.
He still talks
AB,
about it.
I'm sure he does. I'm sure everyone does. AB, of course, was 100 yards away at ground level, so he had a perfect view of it. And he's always told me it was, it must have hit the ground. It must have hit the ground. Umpires did the decent thing. They actually did talk to each other, and they both seemed to agree. So that was that. And actually, to be fair, that was the absolute key turning moment of the afternoon. I mean, cricket being what it is, I can tell you that if the decision had gone the other way, that ball would have probably got him out the next ball.
But you could turn around and say, well, it didn't happen to Alan Borden, was on 24 at the Lord's Test match with Gat. I mean, these things start to sort of... It wasn't as controversial, but it was a talking point.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I mean, the Gat thing was... I mean, Mike's...
That was the Herschel Gibbs moment.
How did he drop that? How did he drop that?
Well, no, the difference... Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mike, let's face it, when you're standing at short leg, which no one really likes doing...
No.
When you've got a perfectly good chance, goes into the hands, yes, you're entitled to celebrate, especially as it's AB. The finest Australian batsman of his generation, give or take. And to then literally throw it away and watching it 190, whatever it was, it does haunt you. I mean, there are all sorts of people who drop catches at key moments, we know that, and they will never forget it. So, that did make a bit of a difference too.
And then you go to the Oval and you win the Test match there by an innings and 94 runs. Would it be your finest series in an Ashes series? You scored 723 runs, a double hundred in there as well. One of your best?
Absolutely. Proudest moment to be standing on the balcony at the Oval with the Ashes, or what looks like the Ashes, in your hand. Although I've always said it's a bit like a scene from The Life of Brian, because you're 3 floors up, the crowd's down below, 100 feet below you, and they can't see it. They can hardly see it. It's the irony about the Ashes is it's 4.5 inches high. Give or take, with a bit of a plinth. So you hold it up. It's like sort of holding up sort of that. But there is an awful lot of history in a very small urn, and so you have that proud moment. Luckily, of course, cameras record it for you. But it was 4 months, 3.5 months of classic stuff. At the end of which you have that proud moment, and AB had the same thing 4 years later. It was my turn then to stand back and allow him the accolades, but as a batsman, so selfishly again, as a batsman, it was my most productive series of all time. And it's in my 32 times I vaguely tried to captain England. I can tell you I had every combination of batting reasonably well and losing, batting terribly and losing, winning a couple of series, losing a couple of series with I had every possible combination. That was the best because I got the runs that allowed me to lead from the front. For instance, the Oval, day one at the Oval in that final game, we knew that obviously if we could draw it or win it, we'd take the Ashes. And Graham Gooch and I both got pretty good hundreds. And at the end of the day, you're 350 for 2. So you're in a pretty good position at that stage. And that sort of thing, when you can lead from the front, as anyone who's ever tried to do it, it does help everything. It helps the decision-making process. As a captain, you feel more confident. For instance, a couple of days later, we had the chance to make Australia follow on. And some of the guys, as you come together in that huddle, as wickets are going down, 7, 8, 9, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? We're saying, well, if we stick them in, that gives them maybe a chance. You stick them back in, maybe gives them a chance of recovering. Maybe if sort of negative thought, if they bat well, maybe we're under pressure batting 4. We might, no. So I had that gut feeling at that stage that the momentum was all with us. So we stuck them back in. Things went as I would have liked them to. And we managed to polish off the game, make it 3-1, have that scene on the balcony of the Ashes, and then it absolutely chucked it down. For the rest of the day, it was hosing down, good English summer stuff. But we were in the dressing room with, champagne and all the rest of it, as you would be at the end of an Ashes series.
David, thank you very much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. And we've just loved hearing your thoughts on 85 and also all things cricket. We appreciate your time. Thanks.
My absolute pleasure. All the best. I have one regret, which it looks as though you guys are not going to let us into Australia to be there for the Ashes. Because going back to where we started, I've always loved coming down. A lot of friends I'd like to catch up with, but let us see what happens. It should be, as ever, a classic.
No doubt about that. Hopefully that will happen, Junior. Thanks for your time on the podcast.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Don't forget you can subscribe to the Road to the Ashes podcast on your favourite podcast provider. See you in a fortnight.